idea of the norm of inclusivity is it's the center of a really heated debate. I think one of the most heated debates in our field of mediation. And if you had to boil it down, it would be the question of who should be included at a given peace table, who and what and how and why. And as a working definition, we usually draw from the UN guidance for effective mediations definition that inclusivity is the extent and manner in which both the views and the needs of conflict parties and other stakeholders are represented and integrated into a mediation effort, into the process and outcome of it. But the question is, well, who are these stakeholders? Who are the conflict parties? What are the issues of representation and participation that arise? So because the definition is so ambiguous, it's subject to a really intense debate. I think that one of the definitions that comes to mind is the voices of unarmed actors that aren't included, and they're often thought of as women and civil society, minorities that might not be at the table because they don't hold arms. But the idea of inclusivity can also refer to armed actors. In fact, there's a growing debate of the need among mediation practitioners who voice this opinion that, well, we need to also talk to armed actors that might not be so easy to speak to, whether they're prescribed or blacklisted on different groups, or it's just the idea of who needs to be engaged with to make a mediation process and effort effective. In terms of effectiveness, it also raises the question of, well, the more voices that are included doesn't make a mediation effort less efficient. And I think it doesn't need to be voiced in these terms of a dilemma or a trade-off. I think if a mediation process design is seen in a way that's creative and makes use of sequencing and timing, and not just this idea that there's this one classical peace table, then I think we can work around that. Yeah. So I think at the heart of it, why inclusion is such a big topic in mediation nowadays is, at the heart of it, it's just getting more voices heard. And so if more voices are included in a peace process, local knowledge is used. It might make a peace process more implementable, more sustainable, although in practice that might be very hard to prove or find evidence for that. But at the same time, there's this understood need that a peace process can possibly be more transparent as well if more voices are included at the table. So the significance is really important, but there are a lot of challenges as well. I think there are kind of three main challenges that I see. The first is, well, once a certain voice or sector is included in a peace process at the peace table, what we find is that the demands that are being made are not kind of coherent or representative of the bigger group, or sometimes there are voices that push and push and push to be included, and once they are, there's not much that's said or that's clear. So there's a really big need to be coherent. And that's difficult because what is civil society and how do we define it? It's another big question that's not easy to answer. And I think another challenge for mediators is being able to apply inclusivity in this norm in a local context, and conflict contexts vastly differ, and it's very difficult to apply such a universal norm and localize it into a given context. And then lastly, in terms of the cost of kind of paying attention to the voices of those that aren't included versus those that are already at the table and who have certain demands, it's very difficult in terms of designing a process. I think practically and how to actually do that is a major challenge for mediation actors today. So, in terms of how successful the Women, Peace and Security agenda has been, I think in terms of the discourse around it and the idea that women should be included in peace processes, that they need greater and more meaningful representation. I think since UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security came out in year 2000, in the last 15, 16 years, you see a change in discourse. I mean, it's everywhere. And I think that has been one of the greatest successes, that this understanding that it is important has resulted in programming, in earmarked budgeting, in policy. The discourse is just there. And I think that's a huge achievement. At the same time, just because the discourse has moved and progressed doesn't mean in policy and practice it has been easy to implement. And that's what I think we're seeing now. Because it happened 15 years ago, 16 years ago, you're seeing a lot of research and analysis that has taken stock of the last 15 years, and the results have been quite mixed at best, especially when you're looking in between different regions. I think this speaks to a lot of the challenges that this agenda has faced. I can think of maybe, three main challenges. I think the first is it's hard to localize, again, this universal norm into different locales and contexts. The second is, I think, what could be done to bring this agenda forward even more is to integrate research more. There's incredible feminist research, theoretical research that has moved far beyond just the add women and stir rhetoric. There's research about intersectionality, race, and class. How does that have to do with peace processes and mediation? Masculinity, an amazing body of literature that talks about the experiences of men, the gendered experiences of men vis-a-vis women, vis-a-vis boys, and vis-a-vis girls. And that's starting, but I think there could be a lot more. And I think, lastly, the biggest challenge that could bring things forward is differentiating between a rights-based approach to women, gender, inclusion, and a pragmatic approach. Because I think a lot of times these approaches are conflated, and then that results in confusion and debates that maybe aren't really useful. So I think there's a long way to go, and that's my take on it.